You're very welcome to, where are we at? Podcast 311. Thank you for joining me this week. And I'm bringing you, I guess, a topic that not many of us anticipate we'll ever need to know about until we do, I guess. And that's pension adjustment orders. Um, they are a really important topic when you need to know about them. But previous to that, they're not on our radar at all. So I'm going to share what a pension adjustment order is, how it is calculated for the different parties in a separation or divorce, what type of benefits it applies to, the outline the contingent benefits order, and also how do you actually divide or split or manage your pension pots after a pension adjustment order um, has been put in place. So that's what I'm going to share this week, and I do hope it helps. The sun is shining on the Mead Gold Coast again. We're the 7th of October, and it's like the summer here. It's always like the summer here on the Mead Gold Coast. Okay, so let's get into the topic. Ultimately, what is a pension adjustment order? Pension adjustment order it's a legal instrument that's used to divide the pension benefits between spouses or civil partners following a judicial separation, divorce, or dissolution of a civil partnership, or at the end of a long-term relationship, ultimately. It's a legal instrument. Financial advisors don't do them. Trustees don't do them. It is the courts and legal profession who put these together. And they're really important when you're involved in a separation or divorce. They're a really important part of the puzzle. Pension benefits can and often are a huge part of the financial picture. They can be the biggest asset, the biggest financial asset in a separation. So in that scenario, it's important that it's done right and that people are treated fairly, and that there's clarity around all that, because these separations and divorces are a difficult enough, challenging enough journey without having opacity and lack of clarity and inequality from a financial perspective, included when it comes to the pension benefits. So that's what they are. As part of my research for this piece, I came across the fact, according to the CSO, that Ireland has the second lowest divorce rate in the EU as of 2020, at 0.6 divorces per 1,000 persons, as they say. So less than 1 per 1,000 people. I don't know what, if I had to have guessed before seeing that, what I would have thought it was. I probably would have thought more, to be honest. And we are below the EU average of 1.6 divorces per 1,000 persons. So we're way below the average. Very significantly below the average. And the highest divorce rates within the EU, I was intrigued to find this out in 2022, I believe it was, where Latvia, 2.9 divorces per 1,000, Lithuania, 2.6 divorces per 1,000 people, and Sweden, 2.1. So they're all like ultimately nearly 3 times more than the Ireland rate, which I was surprised by. I don't know who I might have said the EU, the highest rates were in the EU, but that's where they were. So Latvia, Lithuania, and Sweden. So Ireland, 0.6, so well below the average. Second lowest divorce rate in the EU. But it happens, right? It is a fact of life. So what does the pension adjustment order do? How does it help? So the pension adjustment order is a court order made under Family Law Act in Ireland. It directs how pension benefits should be divided up and will be divided up between the original holder of the pension scheme, so that's the member, and their spouse or civil partner, the non-member, as they're called, following the end of the relationship. And the objective is to ensure that the non-member receives a fair share of the pension entitlements accumulated during the marriage or civil partnership. That's ultimately what it is. Now, if both parties have pension benefits, then it can apply to the member and the non-member in each scenario, depending on what is required. And ultimately, one would hope what is the simplest means to get to a point where both parties are equitable based on what is deemed to be equitable in that scenario. So there's two types of benefits a pension adjustment order can affect. So the main one, the primary one, relates to actual retirement benefits. So the value of the benefits and the benefits, the income, future income benefits ultimately. So what's going to be paid to the member upon retirement. All right. So whether that's the income or the lump sum, and that depends on whether it's defined benefit pension or whether it is a non-defined benefit, DC, defined contribution, or personal pension. It depends. But ultimately, pension adjustment order relates to the retirement benefits. That's the income or lump sum on retirement ultimately. And then also to the contingent benefits. So that's separate benefits to the pension. So for argument's death in service benefit. All right. So if you die, then there's a lump sum of money paid out separate to the pension pot. So that's called contingent benefits. So it can apply to both or one or the other. And I mentioned a second ago, pension adjustment orders can relate to any form of pension scheme. If you know this world, you'll know that there's lots of different types of schemes. And usually it makes sense why someone might have one type of scheme over the other. But if you're not in this world, then this might be gobbledygook, right? And it'd be very difficult to get your head around what type of scheme and how does that relate and what's the value and how do I actually get the benefit out of that? Never mind then how do you split it up, right? So the pension adjustment order relates to all types of pension schemes, no matter what type of pension scheme you or your current or past spouse partner has or had, relates to them all. So if it is an occupational pension scheme, so where you're a member of a large group scheme, so it could be a master trust, for example, a defined contribution scheme, that type of occupational scheme, it can apply to those. Private pensions, so there's PRSAs or personal pensions or AVCs, PRBs, executive pensions, buyout bonds, retirement bonds. It'll apply to those. And then public sector pensions, of course, right? Because people working in the public sector get divorced and separate as well. So, with Gardaí and civil servants, teachers, nurses, etc. It relates to all different types of pension schemes. Pension adjustment order will. There are two ways that they assess how to divide them up. One is the relevant period, and the other is the relevant percentage. Two separate concepts, but just to explain those briefly. And I am not a pensions adjustment expert by any means, right? But this is to outline how it is looked at. So if you're in this scenario or someone you know or love is in this scenario, this might just help their understanding. They don't need to be the expert, but they might want to understand how it works and how they might fare or not fare. So the relevant period is the specific time frame during which the members' pension contributions that are to be divided were made. All right. This is defined in relation to the duration of the marriage or the civil partnership. So, for example, if a couple were married for 20 years, but the pension contributions that are being assessed spanned 30 years, then the relevant period will be confined to the 20 years of marriage. So the funding the member did ultimately before the marriage is deemed off limits, right? In that scenario, if they were contributing for 10 years, then they got married and they were married for 20 years, they were a member for 30 years, but the relevant period was the last 20 years in that scenario. Then there's the relevant percentage. And the relevant percentage determines how much of the pension benefits accrued during the relevant period will be transferred to the non-member. So you figure out the period, then you figure out the relevant percentage. And this percentage is usually determined based on the court's assessment of factors such as the financial situation of both parties, off pension balance sheet, their future needs and incomes and any other assets that have been divided as part of the separation or divorce process. Beg your pardon. So that's how it typically will be done. So, for instance, if a court decides that 50% of the pension contributions during the relevant period should go to the non-member, then the pension adjustment order will stipulate that the non-member is entitled to half of the pension accumulated during that time frame. And there again, the percentage applies only to the benefits earned within the relevant period, not the entire value of the pension in that type of a scenario, potentially. So there's a lot of figuring out to be done here. And the pension adjustment order stays with the pension, and I'll come back to that in a minute. Then there's contingent benefits order. So I mentioned earlier on contingent benefits. This relates to a PAO, deals specifically with the division of contingent benefits, right? Which arise in the event of the death of the member before they retire. So as I mentioned, death in service. So as part of the pension adjustment order, they'd look at the contingent benefits. Are there contingent benefits separate to the actual pension pot itself? Is there death in service, which is the most typical? Well, in that event, then, is that also to be divided if that event happens and there is a lump sum payout? So that ensures, again, or tries to ensure that the non-member spouse or civil partner retains a share of any benefits that may be payable on the member's death, even if the marriage or relationship or partnership has ended. That's the idea. And a contingent benefit order can operate independently of a pension adjustment order or in conjunction with one. All right. So ultimately, a person can receive a share of both the retirement benefits under the PAO and contingent benefits through a separate court order, or maybe just to one, depending on the circumstances and the scheme. Many schemes don't have contingent benefits. PRSA, for argument's sake, will not have a separate lump sum, usually, benefit to the actual pot itself. So in the event of death with a PRSA, for example, before you retire, then that value is paid out as a lump sum. Whatever the value of the pot is, that's paid out as a tax-free lump sum to the estate. So there's no separate contingent benefit. It usually only applies to occupational schemes where you'll have your pension scheme, but you'll then also have this rider benefit, a death in service thing. That's done to attract employees ultimately, right? That you might be paying for yourself. So that's the main difference there, right? What's the difference between a PAO and a contingent benefit order? Well, ultimately, as I mentioned, they relate to two different things. Pension adjustment order relates to the retirement benefits. Contingent benefit order applies to death in service benefits or other benefits payable in the event of member's death before retirement. That's the key difference. And there's the timing. The pension adjustment order comes into effect upon the retirement of the member, right? Directing how the pension income or lump sum is to be divided and paid out. That's ultimately when it comes into force, right? And then a contingent benefit order is only triggered if the member dies before retirement. Pension adjustment order can affect both the pension fund's lump sum and the ongoing pension payments upon retirement, whether it's an annuity or an ARF, for example, whereas a contingent benefit order is concerned with debt-related benefits, such as the lump sum debt benefit. That's basically what we're talking about. So how are they made, right? So ultimately, to get a pension adjustment order or a contingency benefit order, an application must be made to the Irish courts, typically as part of a judicial separation, divorce, or dissolution. A pension adjustment order on retirement benefits can be made after divorce or dissolution, I believe, if pension has yet to be drawn down. It can be made post. It would make sense to do it at the time, before finalizing the divorce or dissolution. When it comes to a pension adjustment order on contingent benefits, the time frame to make an application to the court is limited to a max of 1 year post-divorce or legal separation. So it has to be done within a year. And the court, I believe, will consider a wide range of factors when determining the specifics of the order, including the financial position and future needs of both parties, the length of the marriage or the civil partnership, the contributions made by each spouse or partner to the marriage, both financially and otherwise, and the welfare of any dependent children. There is a lot in that. There's a lot to be unpacked and figured out and ultimately viewed and decided on. Importantly, once the pension adjustment order is made, it's communicated to the pension scheme trustees, all right, who are then legally obligated to administer the pension in accordance with the order. So, if you're one of the parties, whether the member or non-member, pension adjustment order is made, that is communicated to the trustees. That pension adjustment order is then noted on that pension scheme. So any future drawdown, lump sum payment, and indeed death benefit, if it's related to a contingency order, the trustees have to act in accordance with that pension adjustment order. So it is on the pension. If the member were to decide to move that pension to another structure or another provider, for argument's sake, at any point in the future, which they're entitled to do, if it was to get better service, better performance, better fees, whatever it might be, they're entitled to move that pension adjustment order. As a financial planning firm, if we're establishing a new structure via trustee, for argument's sake, one of the key questions as part of that process is about establishing if there's a pension adjustment order on the scheme that is being moved. If there is, then that obviously needs to be noted on the new scheme. It travels with it. That's really, really important to ensure, obviously, that whatever was deemed to be fair and equitable as part of the divorce or separation travels with the pension. So it gives flexibility to the member to move schemes in future if there is merit and value and benefit in them doing so. Pension adjustment order doesn't hamstring them to an existing provider where they might be suffering underperformance or paying excess fees, getting terrible service, whatever the case may be. When a pension adjustment order is done, so separate to the member actually moving the entire scheme, when the pension adjustment order is completed, the non-member can choose to transfer their entitlement out of the member scheme or leave it in the member scheme. All right. As I said, the trustees, if you leave it there, the trustees are obliged to ensure that you as the non-member will get whatever you are entitled to at the time in future. But you have the option, right? If you leave it there as the non-member, right, you do not have control over the funds within the pension or how it is invested, whether it's moved in future. They are not your funds until such time as the pension adjustment order comes into force when you retire benefits. So if there's underperformance on the scheme, if there's high fees being paid on the scheme, then that's going to impact both the member and the non-member. Again, if you're not the member, you cannot directly influence the investment decisions or what structure it's used, etc., what fees are being paid. You don't have control over that. So once a pension adjustment order is granted by the court, it is possible for the benefiting spouse, partner, that non-member, to transfer their portion of the pot to their own pension scheme immediately, if they wanted to do so. And this allows them to invest the funds in a portfolio or in a way that there is comfortable for them and that gives them control and is in line with their own timelines. And it's independent of their ex, ultimately, which this is often a sensible thing to do. It's often the desired way to do it, provided there's a clear benefit from a fund, fee, performance, service, or access perspective. So there's two ways of dividing pension benefits: earmarking and pension splitting. Getting slightly into the weeds here, but earmarking involves directing that a portion of the pension member's future pension benefits be paid to their former spouse or partner when the member retires, right? This means that the non-member does not receive a separate pension fund, but rather a share of the benefits of the existing pot when they eventually become payable. So this ties the non-members' payments to the member's retirement and decisions regarding the pension, as I mentioned. Then there's pension splitting, which is, as I said, often the preferred route from an independence and control perspective. Actually dividing the pot at the time of separation or divorce or any time after. This then is a percentage of the original pot is transferred into a separate fund in the non-member's name, where they have total control, direct access, and only they have access to the information, and they ultimately are the decision maker on that in terms of investment, structures, drawdown timing, etc. All future decisions. They are the key considerations. There's a lot in pension adjustment order. As I said, my hope is that this piece will clarify and give a bit of an understanding in terms of, okay, this is what actually happens. This is how it's viewed. So in the hope that it will ultimately put your mind at ease potentially and help you understand what's actually going on and maybe influence it and make some decisions that are going to make life and your financial future as good as it can be. Citizens Information website is a great source of information and further knowledge around all of this as well. And obviously, it's a huge decision. It can be a big part of our financial picture. So if you are going through something like this, then obviously I encourage you to hire the best that you can afford in terms of legal team and indeed potentially financial advice if that's something that you're going to need as part of all of this. I hope it helps. Thank you very much indeed for listening. As always, you're a legend.